Welcome, everybody. We're going to be talking about Aspire today. I'm very curious, how many people in the room use .NET Aspire or Aspire? Okay, like 5 or less. There was a little pop quiz there. It's not .NET Aspire anymore. That's one of the things I want you to remember as you walk away from this talk. It is just Aspire, or Microsoft Aspire, but just Aspire is what the team would like you to call this technology. And I'll dive into a little bit of that at the intro of this. But it's a change to the title of this talk, which I know is on the website. It's on all the schedules. I apologize for that, but this is literally the 3rd year in a row where I've submitted a session to talk at Stir Trek on a technology from Microsoft. And in between the time I submit the session and now, they changed the name of the product. Last year it was around Copilot, and then it was not Copilot, and this year it's not .NET Aspire, it's Aspire. So thanks for joining me, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about it. I'm Brian McKeiver. I'm co-owner of an agency in Grand Rapids, Michigan called BizStream. But I've been doing technology for a long, long time, since about 1999, actually. And for that, I've been recognized as a Microsoft Azure MVP in cloud native or PaaS applications, as well as the AI stack. My day job is actually helping my company implement content management-based websites that are high-powered and do various things. So for that, I've been recognized as a Kentco MVP and Content AI MVP as well. And I'm on X, LinkedIn, and I do have a blog if you want to follow later on. One last thing, my company is kind of recognized as one of the experts in providing these high-class, high-powered integrated websites that talk to ERPs and CRMs and DAMs. And almost everything we do is in Microsoft Azure. And there's usually lots and parts and pieces and different resources that we use to put these solutions together. And that's one of the reasons this technology really spoke to me when it came out. In fact, getting into like the first impression of a .NET Aspire, it kind of originated in 2023 and was announced around .NET Conf. And it had the .NET Conf power of community and amplification behind it. And they were talking about cloud-ready stack to build observable, production-ready, distributed applications. And I went, man, distributed applications. Don't we already have like 3 or 4 different ways to do distributed applications? Do we really need another one? And honestly, that's where my opinion stopped. I was like, I'm just not going to really learn about this. I went back about my day-to-day job with my business partner. I will let you guys decide which is which in this equation. But this is how we work together back in the shop. And some time passed, and I ignored it, and I forgot about Aspire. Didn't even think about it. Then MVP Summit happens roughly March of every year when they do it. And I happen to be there with a good friend of mine from Grand Rapids, Jay Tower, who wishes everyone hi. He's usually at this conference, but he couldn't make it. And we sat through a session by David Fowler around how .NET Aspire had evolved. And he said, and I remember it because I wrote it down, it's a must-have for every developer, even if they're not working in the cloud. And that's the thing that kind of sparked my interest for real. When David Fowler says something, you guys know who David Fowler is if you're .NET people? Yeah, most of the people in the room. Super smart guy, has done a lot of things for the .NET world. So when he says things are a must-have, then I went back after that and said, yes, I'm going to dive in. I'm ready. Give me the Aspire power. Let's dive in. Okay? Then, fast forward to a couple months ago, and that's when I first heard that the rename and change happened from .NET to Aspire to just Aspire. In this year's summit, I was somewhat confused again, but ultimately really happy with the name and why it's landed where it's landed. Because Aspire is not just for .NET, it's actually a way to build really awesome developer workflows and experiences on more than just .NET projects. and I'll get into like one small example of that. But for today, I am going to focus a little bit on the .NET projects, because that's what really I wanted to do today in the talk. And this is one of the pain points that Aspire tries to address. When you build modern applications in 2026, whether or not you're using AI and agents, or you're doing it by hand, or you have something that's already been in existence for 18 years, there's a lot that goes into it, right? There is the front end, the back end, the database, the infrastructure as code, CI/CD, migrations, all the fun things that it takes to make a really enterprise class solution. And what that means is things get complex pretty fast. It's not a simple press F5, publish to the IIS server or out in Azure, and you're done. There's typically a lot of deployment steps. Hopefully you're automating those as much as you can, and if you aren't, I really encourage you to talk to some of the other speakers, especially Victor and Brian in the room, because that's what their sessions are all about, is doing DevOps the right way. But Aspire is targeted at kind of addressing this complexity and making it simpler and making it faster. And today, right now, the way that this tool is introduced, it is an agent-ready, code-first tool to compose, debug, and deploy any distributed app. And what I like about how they've structured it is it's not just about the distributed part, it's really like the any app part. So even if your web project is simply a front end with a database behind the scenes, that falls in the definition of distributed for Aspire. It just means that there's multiple components, multiple sources that may depend on one another, and that's what we're going to be able to model using this new tooling, this orchestration, and it's going to be able to be done in something that's very familiar to a lot of .NET developers. So other than the really pretty way to announce it, what is Aspire? And it's really a new CLI and a set of project templates and a set of NuGet components and other types of components that provides what's called the Aspire app host, which is like the brain of the solution, and provides a set of integrations and resources for representing components and putting them together. And then the dashboard is the third major component that allows you to really get a high level of observability and connectivity and what's going on with your applications. And we'll dive into those things in this talk. But to really, really just get started, Aspire CLI, you download it, and then you call init, and it can walk you through how to make all these things come to life. And we'll see that today in the demos. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around it to begin with, because like I said, the app host is the brain, and then there's multiple types of connection options, I'll call it, to bring together the components of your application. So I liked thinking of it like this, is the app host is the entire collection and the driver of your solution, and whether or not you've got a cache like Redis, an API service, a Blazor front end or MVC, you have things that need to be shared across them, and the concept of service defaults and service bindings is what they all tend to share across, because technically your API service is probably talking to the same database as the Blazor front end, right? That'd be pretty common. So the service bindings and service defaults in Aspire bring that together. So far, does that make sense? People with me? Cool, thumbs up, thank you. Okay, so to kind of get it going, you can go to the aspire.dev site, and it starts out with a simple PowerShell script to get the CLI installed, and you run that, and then you're going to start using the kind of walkthrough documentations to spin it up. So I'm hoping that this works, because I'm going to show you that in action. I did record it ahead of time, so we don't have to worry about the Wi-Fi. And here we go. So download the PowerShell script. It's executing, which is downloading the required components it needs to. And to be honest, this does take a little bit, and I sped it up in the video, so if the numbers jump really fast, that's some post-editing magic. But in theory, when this finishes, it should basically install itself, and that's all it takes. It is one command to start up and have the CLI ready on your machine. You can check it by calling -- version as an argument to that CLI, and you should see 13.2 or maybe 13.3, because I think 13.3 may come out like this week or next week or something like that. But it's that simple to get started. It's just like installing a CLI. You don't have to have Visual Studio tooling, VS Code tooling, Rider. You don't need all the other things. You can actually start at a CLI level. What that does is really start providing the getting started steps and a different path for immediately working on a new application or immediately start working on an agentic experience. And even though the intro to my talk and the intro to Aspire says an agent-ready solution, I'm not going to spend as much time today on the agent-ready part because I think it's more valuable for you all to understand the really basics and the concrete solutions for how it all comes together. I'll do a little bit of AI stuff at the end, but let's get the basics down first. I think that's really super important. So with the CLI ready, the next thing I recommend doing is, if you are a VS Code user, to actually install the Aspire official extension for VS Code, because that does make this easier to actually scaffold a brand new project for new development, as well as putting it into existing projects. So what does that look like? What happens when you install the extension and you go to the command palette, you're going to get a whole set of commands that you can run, like adding an integration, deploying, doing all the things you need to do. It's all in that extension, and it's actually pretty easy to use. But as I said, you don't have to have that. If you really, really want to, you can actually go through the chain of using the .NET CLI to do this if you're in the .NET world or others. But again, you can type all these commands and add all these projects together manually, or you can actually use the extension to scaffold it up. So I would recommend the extension because it's pretty quick. And here is that in action. So I'm going to install my first Aspire project. I'm going to go to my code instance with the add extension, and I'm going to say Aspire new project. And it's going to actually walk me through what kind of thing are we looking to build. So I'm going to build a Blazor app, because that's the most common thing that I would do as a web developer in 2026. And I'm actually going to just give it a name and a location of where to save the project and what to call it. I'm calling it Wally because we have a dashboard at BizStream on the wall on TVs, and we have a computer there, and its name is Wally, so it's our Wally dashboard. It's going to ask me a few questions. Would you like to run tests? Would you like to set up dev URLs? And walk me through the absolute minimum steps, and then it's going to scaffold the required projects that go with this. So in about, 30, 40 seconds, you'll have a working app host project with a sample web project, an API, and the service defaults and tests. And when we run that, one of the big benefits of running Aspire is the actual dashboard that comes up and happens when you do that. So if you see this dashboard, that means it worked. And I'm not going to dive into the dashboard quite yet, but it's something that as it gets smart enough, it understands that the services are waiting to start or not. And if you run them, you see a Blazor app come up, and you know things are working. So this is the standard Blazor Hello World demo, right? Again, pretty easy. You're automating it, you're spinning it up, and from a brand new project, one of my takeaways for you all is there's almost no reason to not use this when it comes to .NET world, because it's going to have some pretty awesome capabilities that we'll get into next. Again, does that make sense so far? Cool. Let's dive into it. What that created and where you're going to want to start is in the app host project. The app host is a very simple project. There's basically two files you need to worry about really. apphost.cs, which is the main kind of control flow and logic. And that's where a lot of your work is going to be. And then the project file and how it's defined. So this is looking at that CS project file that it generated for us. And the key here is it's saying that we're working in .NET 10. These are the user secrets that the whole set of projects and solutions have access to. And then we're having project references to the other project in the kind of folder structure, which in this case is the API service and the web Blazor frontend. So 2 project references that reference that. That's just the CS proj file that sends the structure. Program.cs or sort of apphost.cs, that's a little bit of a typo there. Think of it like your program CS. When we start a web project for the last 7 or 8 years, what's the very first line in a standard MVC or Blazor program.cs? It is var builder equals web application.createBuilder, right? We've been using that for years if we're in modern .NET. Well, Aspire's a little different, and it actually has this new object called the distributed application. And the distributed application is what apphost is all about. What we're doing here is we're starting to orchestrate our resources and dependencies in C# that make up our project kind of structure. So with that distributed application, we create a builder, we add the project, and we tie it to the namespace of the Blazor project that we created, or the API service that also is behind the scenes. We give it kind of a local variable name. We say there's a health check as a part of it. And then we add the API service that we were building in line 3 as a kind of reference to the main web project in line 6. So we're tying those things together, and because we're saying with reference, if our project has multiple components, and at the end, the desired output is that full Blazor app, and if one of the other dependencies doesn't compile, doesn't start, doesn't run, then the whole thing fails. Right? Or if it does all work correctly, then it all works. Right? And that's what you want to see. You want to be able to see all those parts and pieces come together the right way. You don't want to build your website, see a white spinny thing in the browser for 30 seconds to realize that SQL server never started. Right? So this saves you that kind of developer loop of, oh crap, I have the wrong connection string or whatever. Okay, before we get into that, apphost as the brain, as the orchestrator, resources, making sense. Okay, less thumbs up that time, but we'll keep going. How the apphost actually injects and does things with the actual projects is the next part of the value of Aspire. And the service discovery, yellow box in the diagram, is the main way that you can build services that you want to use across all of your resources, share them, have one place to do that, one set of code to do that, and I have to recreate adding things like telemetry or HTTP resiliency or into multiple different projects. You're doing it once, and Aspire will inject that into them for you. So that service discoverability aspect is a project that it also builds for you. Again, very simple. Extension.cs is the only class you're really going to start out with in this project, and it has its own CS proj file. And you can see that this one has a few more package references. You're not referencing other projects in the service discovery, you're referencing the packages. And here we're adding in the major one, which is really OpenTelemetry. So there's a couple different OpenTelemetry things, and some HTTP resilience, like retry policies and things like that. And other than that, it's pretty simple. But what it does is it gives you this templated base set of code that inside of the add service default method, you're configuring OpenTelemetry, you're using health checks, you're doing the discoverability, and you can do other things in here as well. But that add service defaults in line 18 is going to be included in your other projects to allow you to run all this code and keep it nice and clean and just one time, not multiple times. And that's really it from like the setup standpoint. It's the host, the service discoverability, and those other projects. But if you think back a little bit to the host, I didn't plan on quite doing this, but I'm going to do it anyways. Notice I had projects as kind of the main, builder.add project, builder.add project. Those are setting up this idea of each aspect as a resource. And there can be lots of different kinds of resources. So that's kind of the next thing to cover, which is really, there's a resource for darn near everything nowadays in Aspire 13.2 and higher. And it's not only .NET things. It's not only just Azure things. It's actually all sorts of things. So we see like RavenDB, Node, MySQL, OpenAI. There's different kinds of resources. This technology is not just for Azure. So that's my other big takeaway for you all. Besides using this, it's not just for Azure, it's not just for .NET, it works everywhere that we almost need to. We can get into TypeScript, we can do other things with Vercel. There's all sorts of fun things. In fact, Maddie Montoya is like one of the product owners of the Aspire product at Microsoft. And when I saw her a couple months ago at the summit, she said, please tell everyone at SurTrek, it's not just for Aspire. So remember that. But because there's so many different kinds of resources, you can add more than just the out-of-the-box ones, obviously. And I kind of went through this already, but resources do have dependencies, so I was a little bit ahead on that. And there's kind of different types of resources that the solution has. So when you run this locally, you can choose to run it in an emulated Docker container or other things. You can have executable resources like npm and npx. You can have other project resources, which you would do the most in the .NET world, and then you can have like parameter types of resources. So there's lots of those different resources, and really a resource is the parts of your application. The SQL database is a resource. The web project, the Redis cache, external storage accounts, all those things become resources in Aspire. And that's what you're going to work with to model your application. Then integrations are the next part of allowing common code to run inside of your resources and connect out to other things. In this example, I went to the aspire.dev integrations gallery. I'm just showing that there's tons of different integrations that are meant to run. So the classic kind of example of this is you might model a Redis cache resource in your app host, but the code that it takes to connect to that Redis cache that you want in your Blazor app is an integration that you could bring in from the integrations gallery because there's already the Stack Exchange Redis package, right? Similar a little bit to NuGet packages, but this applies to more than just the Microsoft world as well. In fact, just to really clear that up, this is a last minute slide I just added, but you can actually create a resource that is a JavaScript app and runs Node or TypeScript. You can have an executable resource type that runs in Vercel. So that's what we're trying to say. This is not necessarily just for .NET and Azure. The Aspire technology can do all of it. Okay? The last part of getting it all works is taking those resources, the service discoverability, all that stuff, and adding it into the web layer. And that's where we kind of get into, again, standard web project, program.cs. The very first line after create builder from a web application instance would be to add in the service defaults. That's the one part you want to get into your app. And when you do that, that's what allows you to browse, run, and update and upload the Aspire dashboard. So what does it look like when we say run from our Wally project? That's the Blazor app that we started a second ago with that extension. It looks like this. And when it comes up, after you say Aspire run in the command line, you have this awesome dashboard, and we're going to walk through that with this recording, as long as it works. There we go. So what I have is the API service and the web front end in Blazor running. I have a visual graph that represents the dependencies that you've registered for those resources, a list of the resources, and URL endpoints that are configurable to get to the various things that you have running, right? So that's part one of the dashboard, is just seeing what's running and be able to visualize and log it. Next part is the console log. All of the console logs from those things that used to take maybe 2 or 3 terminals, and you have different things running, that all can be combined into one awesome console log experience, along with structured logs, along with metrics and telemetry. It all comes into the dashboard. And that's what David Fowler meant when he said every .NET developer should be using this, because it saves you the time of trying to figure out what was logged, what wasn't, where am I looking, which terminal is it, all that kind of fun stuff. As you can see, we get the open telemetry metrics just automatically. We can do tracing. We can click into each request, see what the details of that were. We get sort of resource and metric consumption that, you know, historically you might get that in Visual Studio in the full solution, or you might be looking in whether it's Azure or AWS or whatever. But now it's all here locally, and you can see that with charts and graphs, you know, number of connections, memory being used, CPU time, all the things you might need to debug a problem. And that's some of the value that the Aspire dashboard brings for you, is the ability to really just see exactly what's going on in all your various distributed app components. What does everybody think? Is that kind of cool? Have you seen the dashboard before? I'm seeing a couple thumbs up, a couple nodding heads. I think it's really cool. I mean, the first time I saw it come up, I was like, man, this is awesome. But I'll be honest. Oh, we have a question.
So we have a legacy app, and I was wondering, does Aspire have like any walkthroughs or things to get like the newer stuff plugged into like some older technologies like .NET Framework?
Yeah, so the question is basically, we have an existing app, and is there any way to take this and plug it into an existing thing that might be an older framework? I'm really happy you asked that question. That's where we're going next. So, thank you, sir. It's almost like you read my mind. I was gonna say, it's all kind of nice and pretty and easy when it's something brand new, right? It's not as easy when it's an existing app, but let's talk about that next. So adding this technology, this tool set into an existing app is what we're gonna walk through in the next part. The good news is it's still the same building blocks. It's still an app host. Think of your legacy app as your web project, light red, pinkish box in the middle, and you still have to do the service discovery injection into your existing app. And in order to show that, I'm gonna talk a little bit about my personal websites. So I run a blog at McKeiver.com. It's an old high school nickname. Talk about that later if you're curious. I've had the domain forever, but it runs, and I talk a lot about Azure and AI and Kentco and content management and things like that. So my blog is actually written in Experience by Kentco. If you haven't heard of that, it is the best .NET CMS solution out there. Sorry, Progress people, if you're in the room. But I do believe that, and my company specializes it, and I've been using it for almost 16 years. It's come a long way. It's super modern, content management system, DXP, e-commerce, digital marketing all on one roof. It's awesome. But it typically looks like this. It runs best in Azure. In fact, it was the first CMS to be certified to run properly in Azure. And in the middle is my Azure App Service. That's where my code is. To the right of that is the database. To the left are other resources, and there's a front door on top of it. What I'm trying to show here is, in a modern .NET solution, you're going to have multiple resources, right? You're going to have possibly Redis. You're definitely going to have external storage. You're going to have a key vaults, app insights, all those things. Sometimes it's hard to work with that on your local host if you're not really aware. And that's what Aspire can do for you as well. It can actually bring the fact that you might be running out here in Azure, but I want to run it locally with my existing application. So how do we make all this work with something that's existing? And there is a walkthrough in aspire.dev that this is the starting screen of it, and it talks to you a little bit about the process of kind of what you need to do. And I'm going to show that with my Kentco blog as the example. So it still is all about getting the CLI. Start with getting that and the extension, but from there, instead of just saying new project, you're going to run aspire init. And what that does is it just looks at the projects in the folder structure understands where there are CS projects files, and will start to put a lot of this together for you. You then need to kind of model in your app host the way that your site is set up to run, and the dependencies and the references of all your resources. That is still up to you. It's not going to do that for you, but it tries to at least figure them out a little bit. From that, you have to turn on what integrations and telemetry things you want to use, but at that point, you just run it. And it looks like this. I'm hoping this works. So when I run Aspire init, first of all, it's going to ask me what version of Aspire do you want to use, because you might have multiple versions. And I'm doing this in the same folder as my main CS proj, or no, I'm actually doing it one level above, but it doesn't matter where you start it from. As long as it's in the same repo with your project files, it will find them. So it searches through the directories, and it starts to say, okay, I've scaffolded the basic CS project folding starting points, and it doesn't know exactly all of the different resources you have. So I'm saying aspire.add Azure Key Vault, because I know I use Key Vault, and it's going to bring in the right package, because there's one that's called Azure Key Vault directly. I also happen to use Azure Blob Storage for my media files. And because there might be a couple options from that, when you say Aspire add Azure Storage, it's going to say which one of these things do you want to do for sure. And then you choose the first one in blue, and you hit OK, and it throws in that package for you. Okay. Now, once you've got the packages in, because again, our goal here is to sort of set up all of our resources and reference them together in our app host. We're bringing in the types of things we need to do with the right packages. Then we need to start thinking about how we're going to bring together all of our secrets and connection strings. And to do that, frankly, it's a little bit of fun, because there's a mode in Aspire that I've kind of not talked about quite yet until now. And it's whether or not you're kind of in publishing mode or you're running local mode. And one of the first things about adding an existing Azure resource versus creating new is the idea of the execution context and is publish mode. So what the pseudocode at the bottom of this is saying is that if I am running in publish mode, make me a new storage account. But if I'm running not in publish mode, basically just local debug, it's saying add a connection string to storage. And this really threw me, actually, the first time I used this, because I was like, what do you mean connection string? What kind of connection string? It just happens to be kind of a naming thing that in Aspire, a connection string can be a connection to anything. It's not the traditional SQL database connection string only, but it also is that. So to connect to an existing Azure SQL database, you don't say add Azure SQL database. You say add connection string to that SQL database. And then in your config file, you have, the name of SQL is actually the SQL database connection string, right? But another connection string example could be the Key Vault secrets, the name, the URI path, all that kind of fun stuff. Or Azure Search, my site happens to use Azure Search. I need to know where that existing search resource is. That's just a connection string in Aspire. So that threw me a little bit, because I was thinking, well, is this just database? No, it's not. It's other resources that exist that you want to connect to. So important differentiation. Ultimately, you end up modeling app host against the site. So this is the real example for my blog. We start at the top with the create application builder. We set up the Key Vault. We set up Azure Storage, which actually has a capability of running in an emulator with Azurite, as long as you have Docker on your machine. So that way you can run locally, still emulate external storage, but when you need to publish, it'll create that storage account for you. Or you don't have to do that, right? That's just this example. Once the Key Vault's there, the storage there, Azure AI Search is there, the SQL database is connected on line 18, then we say, I'm going to add my web project, which is actually, in my case, just a MVC, ASP.NET Core MVC app with references to all those things and then run. So this app host is a little bit more than the demo getting started one, and it's a little bit more realistic. And here's what happens when we actually run this for my site. I don't know how big or how small that is. I apologize if it's a little small. But I'm going to say Aspire run. It's going to run through our app host, do its thing. It's going to start up the dashboard. By the way, there is a security token for the dashboard. Not just anybody can get to the dashboard. When you click the link in the Aspire run CLI command output, it puts the token in there for it. So if you didn't look close, it quickly did that. But there it is. There's my site. You can see it running localhost. It's actually got the storage account running and emulating behind the scenes, so I could have local storage. Here's the graph now to what that looks like. So my .NET site has those dependencies, for search, storage, and secrets or key vault. And you can kind of dive into each one of those and see the logs. It's funny because Kentico does a really verbose amount of logging when it starts. So when I switch to, this is just the startup, all the things it's giving me chatter about. So there's a lot going on there. Again, I get the telemetry and the structured logs. I can look at those and dive in. If I see an error, I can click the error. I can get more details on that or warning and kind of understand what's going on the startup of my site locally. Now, the very first time I did this, the trace and log thing was empty because I missed a step. So pop quiz, anyone following really closely along, maybe what did I forget to do if the telemetry and other metrics were not showing up on the dashboard? I'm hearing add open telemetry. Yes, in a way, that's the service discovery part, adding the service defaults class. That is up to you to do. So when you get to now your web project that existed already, again, line 27 is I did have to add that. I had to add the service defaults call. The references were already there. Aspire did that for me, but you have to actually call it in your web app or existing application to make it work. Okay? So your question earlier about, can I do this with .NET Framework? As any good consultant would say, it depends. It depends if you can reference a library that can get to that service default to get the full value of all of Aspire and all of the dashboard. But can you at least make sure it shows up as a resource in Aspire and be there at least with one line and a link to it to see is it running or not? Yeah, it can do that, right? I just don't know how easy it would be because you're getting into the whole, is it, what was it, .NET standard to allow .NET Core code to run in Framework, and it's been a while since I did that. So, yeah, if something, I feel like it's possible. And then the rest of this program CS is just all about the rest of Kentico starting up and using things. So, okay, I'm gonna keep going. That was it, adding it to an existing application. I hope that made sense. It's a little bit more real world than just brand new. Oh, question, Joe?
Not a question, but there is another way to add it. Within Visual Studio, there's a menu item to add as part of the project. It'll do most of that plumbing for you.
Yes, if you're using, so the comment was if you're using Visual Studio, there's a menu item that will actually do most of that for you. You won't have to remember to do that step. Thank you, it's good clarification. Okay, now, so far we've talked about local development, debugging, dashboard, all that power. The other part of Aspire, well, one of the other parts of Aspire is deployment, right? And being cloud native. Now, I'm gonna have to go through this kind of fast based off time. What happens is the reason that you're sort of orchestrating your C# instructions of resources and getting all the references, Aspire can actually read that and generate bicep for you by running a special command that then you can basically use AZD to deploy it to the cloud in like an Azure container app or other solution. So you would have to make sure the Azure Developer CLI was installed and authenticated, all that kind of good stuff, but basically you run init That would say, would you like to initialize your application? And what that does is it looks through your resources and starts to figure out kind of what bicep do you want to generate. It detects that. It talks about a couple options next, like you have to give it an environment name and a couple other things, but it does generate the YAML file. It generates some next steps markdown. And ultimately what happens is you walk through with AZD up at that point after you've done the init. You pick your subscription, you pick your region, and it starts to go to work, provisioning those resources. I've chosen one of my MVP subscriptions in East US 2, and it starts to do the deployment, right? That's exactly what the Azure AZD does, right? And you can see some progress in the portal or watch here. And if you're in my case, it immediately fails. Because some of the things that we've known for years and years, they still apply. Like, don't use capital letters in the name of your resource that you put in your app host. Capital letters are not allowed in what? Storage accounts. So that's why it failed. I had to go back and fix that and use lowercase. As soon as I did that, ran it again, it actually took the entire solution, put it into a container app. And this takes time. I'm not going to lie. It's like over 5 minutes to just do this part, which is why I just screenshotted it. But eventually, you get a deployed Azure Container app that has your resources and your whatever your project is. You can see that in the Azure portal, and that gives you this nice sort of visualized display of all the things that you've got going, right? So that deployment, the bicep, all that, it can be customized. You can do more things with it, but it did all that for you. That's pretty cool, and that's a little bit of the cloud native part. Again, running low on time, but the last thing I really want to quickly go over is this is set up for agentic development as well. This is the new hotness. It's not been out that long, but basically you can set up Aspire to really work well with your coding agents and your tools. You use Aspire agent in it that gives you skills, an MCP server, and some other CLIs in case you don't have like Playwright. But if you don't have Playwright CLI, you should have that anyways. It's a great tool. And it will walk you through basically setting up this tool to just let agents say, do this for you. So I knew I wasn't going to have time to go through all that. It's also brand new, but I just wanted to plant that seed that when they say agent ready, that's because they've worked a ton on setting all this up. So in closing, my experience, some of these things are still in preview. I feel like that never changes, even since 2024, but that's just the way Microsoft tech goes sometimes. But worth checking out and worth using. Don't let that stop you. Who knows? They might change the name again in 6 months from now just to make this title once again not correct, even more. I will admit that using the existing Azure resources part is probably the most confusing part that I saw, because you can run as existing, you can emulate, or you can connect to existing things. So it's going to take some time to figure out the exact right way to do that for your solution. But there's some help out there for how to do that in the documentation. Naming is hard. Remember, don't use uppercase letters in your storage accounts. I do love this, and our team back at BizStream has kind of been using this for all brand new projects to at least have this layer, because generating that bicep is pretty cool. I will post these slides on my blog. There is a couple really helpful links here. There's a newer Aspirify Fridays playlist on YouTube that David Fowler and Maddie and others really go through how to do a lot of this stuff in detail. Highly recommend that. Links to how to install it. There's a Discord community around Aspire. I would encourage you all to join that if you're on the whole Discord thing. And check out Experience by Kensco if you're curious about content management. But with that, I am basically out of time. This is the URL that the slides will be at in probably a couple hours. We'll get it up there. But I've hoped you've learned a little bit about Aspire today.